right. This is where I do the test 1, 2, 3 to make sure that I can actually.
DigitalOcean's cloud computing platform was designed with simplicity in mind, giving development teams the ability to easily manage it.
All right. Okay, well, you know what? I think it's actually working. I think it's actually working. And if things are working the way I think they're working, I'm going to transition away from my face for a second here. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do this. Are you ready? Let's do this. All right, now if that worked out well, we had a really cool Linux journal intro, and of course, this is Cooking with Linux Without a Net, and I'm Marcel Gagne. In case you don't know that, and I'm pretty sure you do. If you're actually tuning in here, you probably know that. This is Cooking with Linux Without a Net, which is basically where Marcel plays with some Linux and free software, and does it live, which means, of course, he can actually mess up and fall flat on his face. Wait a minute, why am I talking in the third person? Anyway, why is he talking in the third person? There we go. That's a lot better. Today is no different. So today I'm obviously going to mess up. And in fact, I mean, typically I'm supposed to start this right at noon. And if you are checking your clock right now, it is 12:11 p.m. according to the little clock in the corner of my screen. And that basically says that I'm starting late. And that's because, you know, I feel I had errors right from the beginning. I mean, things weren't working out properly. And in fact, I had some weird sound thing. I blame Skype. I blame Skype because I had Skype up and it makes me sound like a chipmunk. And it was not, I don't know. It's really weird. It's just really weird at the moment. Anyway, so I got rid of it, closed it down, rebooted the system, which of course made things late. For those of you who are invariably going to ask me the question, this is what I'm drinking at the moment. I'm drinking some Mezzomondo Pinot Grigio Chardonnay blend. It's an Italian wine, Terra Siciliani 2016. And I know you're used to seeing me drink red wine, but today it's white. So let's transition away from my face on the screen and let's go to what we're going to talk about today. All right, let's do that. Transition. Gone. Okay, so I'm gone from the screen, and oh, let me just do my introduction again here. Here we go. There we go. You never know. I might cut out the first part that went with this. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit of controversy, and the controversy that we're going to cover today is what is the most popular Linux distribution in the world, and there's a lot of different answers to that. And some of those answers depend on whether you're talking about the desktop Linux share of operating systems, whether you're talking about mobile, whether you're talking about servers. All those things are different. But one of the places that people come to find out what the most popular distribution is at any given moment is Distrowatch. And I have a love-hate relationship with Distrowatch. I love Distrowatch because, you know, it's a good way to find out, what the latest, hey, there's the latest development release of NetBSD. And by the way, they don't just follow Linux distributions. They follow, as you can tell, use Linux, BSD, etc. And in fact, if you scroll down that list, not only is there Linux and BSD, but way down here, number 17, React OS. And I actually did a video on React OS recently, and React OS is a distribution which is meant to look like Windows. And in fact, let me open up a new tab here so we can have a look at that for a second. And I actually did, in fact, maybe at the end of the show notes here, I'll include a link to my React OS video. But I did a video where I installed React OS, and in fact, let's see if I can find it quickly here. YouTube.com, Freethinker at Large, and somewhere in there in my Cooking with Linux playlist, let me see, my Cooking with Linux playlist. This is my Cooking with Linux playlist. Oh, there it is, React OS. I mean, it was staring right at me. There we go, installing and running React OS. So we're gonna pause that. We're not actually going to play it right now, but there it is, React OS, Cooking with Linux, and you can find out what that one is. So I actually did a video specifically on that one, but. So Distrowatch is a good place to find out about different Linux distributions, and of course, one of the things that it does is it's like the latest press release from those distributions. In other words, what is the latest version, and not only does it have the latest version, but it also tells you, let's skip the ratings here, but there it is. There's the home page for it. And if you want to have a direct download for this thing, there's the download mirrors. linuxtracker.org is a place that you can go to connect to a Linux torrent if you want to use a Bittorrent client. And for that matter, if you want to use a Bittorrent client, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. If you want to use a Bittorrent client, let me bring up QBittorrent, which is one of the ones that I like a lot. And what we can do is we can go to search over here, and believe it or not, this isn't the only client that does this, but if I wanted to, for instance, install the latest version of, I don't know, Linux Mint, I could just do a search, and there we go. We've got the various Linux Mint distributions, and I can install and, well, I can select and download whichever distribution I happen to want. All right? So you can do that directly from a client like QBittorrent. Now, or you can go directly to either the tracker or the torrent download link, or for that matter, if you just want to download an ISO, which is an image file of the particular distribution, you can find it that way as well. Okay. Now, the reason I say there's some controversy on here is because let's go over here. This is like, you know, what's the most popular Linux distribution? And pay close attention to where it says page hit ranking up there. Okay. You got to pay attention to that because that's not telling the whole story. All right. Or actually it is telling the whole story, but you might think that it means something different. So over the last 6 months, what are the most popular distributions out there? Number 1, Linux Mint. Number 2, Manjaro. Manjaro Linux. Really? Number 2 most popular distribution. Number 3, Ubuntu, Debian, Solus, Elementary, Antergis, Fedora, TrueOS, and rounding out the top 10, MX Linux. You ever heard of MX Linux? I'm not saying that it isn't awesome, but there it is on the top. In fact, let's go take a look at MX Linux here, just for fun. Since we're just doing this live, anyway, we're doing this live. Let's go and have a look at it. MX Linux. What's MX Linux? I don't know. Let's find out. Oh, there we go. All right. It's a, let me see. It's based on Debian stable branch. And let me see. Popularity hits per day. There we go. Popularity hits per day. All right. So if we go back over to the Distrowatch page over hits per day over a 6-month period, this is really in many ways a popularity contest. Okay. And it can be fixed like any popularity contest. I'm not saying that it is. Okay. I'm not saying that it is. But if for whatever reason a lot of people are searching on Manjaro because Manjaro has been in the news, or Manjaro has a new distribution, or there's a lot of Manjaro fans that, you know, want to show the world like that they could rig those numbers by basically visiting the info page for the particular distribution on Distrowatch. Okay? I'm not suggesting for a second that this is actually happening. I'm saying that it could happen, okay? I'm not saying it's happening. I'm saying it could happen. Excuse me for a second while I take a sip of my wine here. Lovely. Anyway, oh, by the way, if you are watching, if you're on and you're doing this live at the moment, I mean, if you're watching live as opposed to watching the recorded copy later on, so I'm not talking to you in the future. I'm talking to you who's watching like right now. Please type something, say hi in the chat window so that we know that you're around there. All right, let's continue on. So anyway, so we've got the different distributions there. So what can we actually read from this? Well, we can read that a lot of people are interested in Mint or are showing interest in Mint by visiting the various pages over here. So this is by no means scientific, if I can use that term. So let's go over to, you know, another site, the Wikimedia Analytics, wikimedia.org, which tracks user agents from various distributions, not just Linux distributions. As you can tell on here, we've got Windows 2000, Windows 10, etc., etc. And it'll give us a different picture of what the most popular distributions are. Now, I'm sitting over here at, let me see, April 2018. Okay, April 8th, 2018. Those are the numbers that we're looking at the moment. And this looks kind of, you know, baddish until you consider something really interesting in terms of the most popular operating system based on user agents that are being recorded. The number one is Android, and Android, of course, is a mobile flavor of the Linux kernel, or the Linux distribution, if you prefer. Now, that is that particular one. Now, if we go over here, let's actually take a look at one of these directly. If we say, let's take a look only at CentOS. Okay, we had some big numbers way back here in 2015, and then we really don't have a lot of information. Let's actually say, look at Linux only. Okay, there's our Linux distribution share in all the various distributions. Let's bring in Fedora into this picture. So we'll add Fedora into this picture. Again, there's little blips down here. We don't really see much of it that way. Let's add Android just for fun. Okay, now as soon as we add Android into the picture, the curve for Linux distributions, for all Linux distributions, goes down quite dramatically. And in fact, if you want to feel good about what's happening out there in terms of you know, the most popular OS in the world, let's add Windows 10. There's Windows 10. Let's add Windows 2000. In fact, let's add all of the Windows variances. And as you can see, way over here, we are still talking. I mean, we've got Android 10. Let's add iOS. iOS is going to be an interesting number to add here. Let's add iOS. Okay, so in the most popular distributions that you've got out there. Now, I could argue that a lot of iOS, just to be difficult here, I could argue that a lot of iOS is actually open source software, which it is. It actually is, which is, you know, you can argue whether they're following the rules to the letter in terms of how they support free and open source software. But that's not what this is about at the moment. This is about what the actual numbers show. So Android is number one, which is a flavor of Linux. iOS is number two, and then we've got number three, and this is like all, you know, traffic on the internet, browser, user agent, in other words, browser traffic, tracked by OS and browsers. And again, this is not going to be the only set of numbers that are in the world. And in fact, if you jump over to Wikipedia, and you take a look at the worldwide operating systems. Now, there's an interesting picture here where they look at desktop and laptop computers. There we go, desktop, laptop computers. Windows 81.91, Mac OS, some unknown, which is going to be like a big collection of everything else that they can't quite figure out. Linux 1.48, so maybe somewhere in there is the real truth as far as the Linux operating system is concerned. Chrome OS, that's a surprisingly low number. You'd think that was actually higher than that. This is to March 2018, according to StatCounter. In fact, let's open up StatCounter and we'll go take a look at that one as well. But as you can see, somewhere in there is probably, between those two numbers, is probably the real truth about Linux operating system, specifically on the desktop. So somewhere between, let's call it 1.5 and, you know, probably 4.5% when you add all that stuff. Again, it's actually surprisingly hard to tell what that is. A stat counter. Oh, okay. Can we actually? No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that right now. Now, another place is you can go into net market shares, and over here, what I did was I based it entirely on mobile operating systems, and Android share in the mobile marketplace is 68.18%. So worldwide, actually, let's go over here to the latest numbers, which would be March 2018, 70.96% versus 28%, let's call it, for iOS, and then a whole bunch of, you know, whatever else exists, whether it's Windows OS or Windows Mobile, and who knows, quite possibly BlackBerry is still represented in those numbers somewhere down there, those little teeny numbers at the bottom there. But Android and iOS, obviously the big ones, and Android by a long shot the biggest one. In fact, if you want to get really, really technical, the most popular the most popular operating system on the planet is actually Linux. There is more Linux out there than anything else. When you take servers, which run the back end of the entire internet, which is going to be things like you know, the servers that move email, web servers across the internet. So all your email traffic, all your web servers, pretty much all of them. I realize there's a small fragment out there that isn't that. Whether it's Nginx or Apache web servers, they're all running Linux. The backbone that runs the internet is running Linux. Google's infrastructure runs on Linux. If you've ever done a search for anything online, you're using Linux. So Linux is by a long shot, the most popular operating system in the world. But of course, trying to figure out what you should be running on your desktop is fairly difficult based on that sort of thing, because who knows what it actually means. So what I did was what I decided to do was take a look at some of these different distributions up there, and Mint is very, very popular. Ubuntu is probably at the top of that list. I mean, if you want to get realistic, it's probably at the top of that list, with Mint a close second behind there. I don't honestly know what the numbers really show. OpenSUSE, Fedora are going to be down there somewhere. Obviously, when you're talking servers out on the internet, those servers that I said run your search engines and so forth, they're going to be Red Hat, they're going to be CentOS, things like that. But over on the desktop, you can use that as a guide, but honestly, if you really want to find out what's happening out there, you might want to chat with a friend of yours who's running a Linux desktop, or, you could ask me if you want. So what I decided to do today is I was going to take a look at, just because, this is going to be a little bit difficult to figure out. What I decided I would do is I would show you 3 different distributions today that you may not have heard about, which are nevertheless up here in this list, okay? And this really means nothing. I wish it did. I really wish it did, but it really means nothing. So let's take a look at a few of them out there, okay? I'm looking at Deepin, I'm looking at Elementary OS, and I am looking at Solus, all right? And there are going to be, of some of these, you're going to be able to install your classic desktops that you want, whether it's KDE, GNOME, etc. But I'm going to take you over to the default desktop that these distributions come with. And hey John, how you doing? Nice to have you aboard. I see you out there. Oh, by the way, like I said, if you're on and you're watching, please say something. All right, I'd like to know that. Be part of the discussion. I mean, that's part of what this is. It's one of the reasons I'm willing to fall flat on my face in front of all you guys. Is I'd like you to join into the conversation. He says as he pauses and sips from his glass of wine. Okay, so this is Deepin, all right? And let's just go back to Deepin here. And if we go over to Distrowatch, remember what I said about the numbers on Distrowatch? Distrowatch claims that Deepin is sitting down here at number 23 in terms of popularity. I had another site open. Let me see if I can find it in my recent history there. The 10 most popular Linux distributions. I thought this was hilarious. This is hilarious because, of course, I'm guessing that they just that they pulled these from God knows where, but they've got things like let me go over here. Manjaro is one of the most beautiful Linux distributions. Elementary OS, blah blah blah. Zarin, blah blah blah. They have a comment here somewhere. Where is it? Where they say this is not a particularly popular distribution that nobody actually knows anything about. Virtually basically saying that, but nonetheless they include it as the 10 most popular Linux distributions of 2018. So everybody's got their own idea of what popular means. But they do mention some of the ones that, and over here, this is funny because they mention Manjaro, and then they mention Manjaro up here. But what they're really talking about down here is Deepin, which is the one that I'm showing you over here. Now, Deepin uses the bar at the bottom to show you, to give you access to unknown volume. Well, let's open that up, shall we? And it's kind of pretty. It's definitely not what you're used to if you're using KDE or. But let's see, what do we got here? Open up our folders. Sorry, I'm running 3 virtual machines simultaneously, so I'm going to be running a little tiny bit slow on some of that. Ken! Nice to see you, Ken! Good to have you aboard. John, Ken, whoever else is there, say hi as well, just so I can say hi to you. Shout out to John and Ken so far, who are brave enough to say hello in the chat window. Let's go into... Yes, I know. There is a very cool little navigation bar. Yes, we could do our updates here and so forth, but there's a very cool navigation bar on the side that gives you access to your various things. That you can think of this as your that little area down there. What the heck is that little area called? It drives me crazy. Anyway, whatever it's called down there. That little area is represented in this nice little bar, including access to things like your volume control and you know, what do we got? We've got power management in here, network access, updates on the system, keyboard language. Changes that you might want to make to the way that your system operates at the moment are accessible through down here. And then, of course, they've got like dedicated movie players, audio players, all of which are accessible from the bottom. And the whole idea is that these are things that a common desktop user will want to have access to. What it has got going for it, if you are a new user and you don't have any preconceived notions about what a Linux distribution should look like, Curia! Hey, nice to hear you. Found you through Backdrop Gitter Chat. Hey, I'm glad that you got a chance to see the CMS comparison. And if you're one of the people from Backdrop, kudos. It's looking really great. All right, let's go back and take a look at. So this is yet another presentation in terms of, you know, what the system, you know, what somebody thinks that the system should look like in terms of what a beautiful system looks like. Wired connection. It's not really wired. It's running inside boxes. So let's go and take a look at Elementary OS. Elementary OS is another distribution that, while it may not be the most popular out there, come on, time to wake up. While it may not be the most popular out there, is actually one that looks very, very pretty. And I am obviously making my system do an awful lot. Typically, memory 11.6. Come on, time to wake up. Time to wake up. You're taking a while to wake up, the Elementary OS. How about Solus? There we go. Solus and Budgie. Let's take a look at Solus and Budgie. This is obviously not completely unfamiliar, but again, it borrows from what they think, or from what they think people are looking for in terms of a Linux distribution, namely something that's, you know, somewhere in between the Windows world, and in this case, very much the Windows world in terms of how you settle all these things. Of course, most distributions have things like the KDE desktop and the Mate desktop and stuff like that, which sort of use this whole idea, namely the start button at the bottom, the quick buttons for access to things like web browsers. Excuse me a second while I wet my whistle with a little bit of wine. That feels better. Let's go back and see if Elementary OS has woken up yet. Elementary OS, have you woken up yet? Have you woken? It hasn't woken up. It may be just to see this. This is the problem with doing this live. Anyway, I'm actually going to force a shutdown on this. And I'm going to try to fire it back up here. Let's see what happens. Elementary OS, wake up. Tum-ta-dum-tum-tum. Give it a try. Try to wake it back up. Are you there? Elementary OS. It was there. I swear it was there. I swear it was there earlier. It was because I actually... Oh, there we go. My goodness. Remember, this is running inside a virtual machine, so this doesn't mean that this is the way that it is all the time, okay? If you're running this live, it's going to be quite different than what we're seeing here. Come on, wakey wakey. And here I was going to point out to you that this is actually a great looking distribution. It looks really pretty, quite beautiful. Oh, there we go. Waking up, waking up. I apologize for the delay. Oh, it wants to reinstall. But I have it installed. It's already installed in a virtual machine and it wants to reinstall. All right, let's just go to try. We're going to go to try and say that we're running from the disk. So this would be running a live distribution from the ISO, okay? Oh my. Elementary, my dear Watson. There we go. There we go. Now, I have to admit, I'm not a big Mac guy. I haven't spent a lot of time on Macs, but I do know that this is what we're trying to mimic down here in terms of their version of friendliness. This is the desktop for Elementary OS. Let's fire up their browser. We'll make it a smaller window so that loading most visited. Most visited what? We haven't visited anything yet. System settings. Obviously, very GNOME system settings. So this is somewhere in between a GNOME desktop. Do you say GNOME or GNOME? Like, you know, backyard gnomes. When you've got gnomes in your backyard, do you say backyard gnomes? No, no. There we go. That's okay. Ignore. All right. Let's go into games. Steam. We've got that's it. That's all we've got. Non-curated games. We've got Steam. Development. No results. Obviously, we haven't updated this. it's not updating it because we don't have a good internet connection according to this thing at the moment. This was installed. I swear, I had it installed. I don't know what happened to it, but it was actually installed. So now, okay, so let's go through the install again. I'm going to start the install on this. Okay, so we're on the live CD for Elementary OS, and this isn't going to be all that. I'm going to skip the, what the heck, install third-party software. I'll say continue on, rock on. And, all right. Any questions in the gallery out there while I'm waiting for Elementary OS to continue on with its thing? I'm not going to install the whole thing. I'm just going to get it started so that we can see what's happening there. And I hesitate, there we go. I hesitate to jump away from it because I have a funny feeling. Elementary, it was installed already. It was installed, so I'm not sure what happened now. Before you can start, go back. Use entire disk. Use entire disk. Erase disk and install Elementary. There we go. So I did have it installed. You can see that I had it installed. For some strange reason in my virtual machine here, it decided that it was not. Hardware preferences notebook. I went from... honestly, I use... this is Curia. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Curia. And I apologize if I'm not. But I have this theory on hardware, especially for my desktop hardware. And let me see, Toronto, New South Wales. No, there's a lot of Torontos. Good grief. Toronto, Ontario. Yes, that's near where I am. I'm actually in Waterloo, but I'm close to Toronto. At the moment, I'm actually running, if you take a look at the box here, you're going to see that I've got 12 gigabytes on the system. It's not swapping because I've got humongous amounts of memory. This is actually an Intel Core i5 with a GeForce 940 MX graphics card. So I do have access to some, let's call it My Dear Watson. Yes, I haven't forgotten, but secret. I know it's a weak password, but let's just go on. I tend to buy PCs that, aren't going to cost me an insane fortune, but this one wasn't exactly the cheapest thing either. It has a 17-inch screen. I like to use a notebook because that way I can carry it somewhere else. I can do something else with it. I have the GeForce card, the NVIDIA GeForce card, because I do want to be able to take advantage of some accelerated things like game graphics or for that matter, what I'm doing at the moment. At the moment, I'm actually Curia. Thank you, Curia. I digress for a second here. My NVIDIA card does give me some speed ups for certain things. And of course, one of the things that I use, as you know if you've watched this before, let me see, where are you? You are in here somewhere. There we go. OBS Studio. OBS Studio is what I use to stream this stuff. And of course, when I decide to record a Cooking with Linux video so that I can edit it later on, so that you don't get all this stuff in between where I try to figure out things and, it doesn't work and then I try something else. I use this for recording as well, at which point I would do recording and then I would edit it with something like, I would use it with Kdenlive. So Kdenlive is what I use to edit video at that point. But I am streaming to Google Live, or what Google calls gaming live or gaming.google.com, or gaming.youtube.com, whatever it is they call it. Live YouTube, anyway. I am streaming using this, okay? So let me minimize that again, or get that out of the way and go back. So that is why I want to have some kind of accelerated video on my system, so that I can make that happen. Where's my boxes? All right, there's my boxes open there. So there we go. So that's the installation as it's going through at the moment, and then of course we can go back to, there we go. See, Budgie saw the internet connection. Budgie was able to do it. Come on, well done, Budgie. Or not Budgie. Solus using the Budgie desktop. I do like the Budgie desktop. I'm a huge fan of KDE. Anybody who knows me, who's watched or followed anything I've done, like in Linux Journal, for all the years, knows that I'm a huge KDE fan. So that is what I tend to like running, which doesn't mean that I don't like other desktops. Like, for instance, I like GNOME 3. I know no one is supposed to like GNOME 3, but I actually like GNOME 3. I'm not a huge fan of classic GNOME, although I'm okay with it, but I'm not a huge fan of it. I also I mean, I've liked some of the weirder ones over the years, which I don't use now, but I still have like this historical fondness, nostalgic fondness for things like Window Maker, for instance. KDE is still my favorite. I really did not like where Ubuntu went with Unity. I really was not a fan of Unity, and much as I know that people like things like this Mac OS type icon bar at the bottom, which, as you can tell, is also being used by Deepin down there. Deepin is using something similar at the bottom here, restoring Deepin from disk, because we're paging out, right? We're writing out to disk when we're not using it. It goes to sleep for periods of time. This will actually wake up a second, but I'm just going to ignore it right now and go back here because obviously elementaries. That bar is already open, and it's meant to mimic operating systems that people think of as friendly and familiar. But the thing that you notice after it's all said and done is that a lot of the apps that they use inside are the same apps regardless of which distribution you might actually want to use. So if you decide to go over here and you go over to Distrowatch and you say, hey, Mint is the most popular operating system out there, and honestly, Mint is an awesome version of Linux. Particularly because it includes things like all those codecs and drivers. I know that some of that stuff is non-free, but it makes it a very easy transition if someone's coming over from, actually, I don't know if it's easy for anybody coming from the Mac world, because the Mac world is just weird, but I'm going to get in trouble for that. But coming over from the Windows world, distributions like a distribution like Mint, and frankly, the Budgie desktop that's being used in Solus here, is going to be awfully friendly. This is, I hate to put it like this, but very Windowsy in terms of the presentation, and it's pretty. I mean, it's a pretty system. Sound and video, Rhythm Box. You can see that we're borrowing a lot of GNOME type apps here. Libre Office is going to be included in most of these guys. LibreOffice Draw, interesting. They don't have things like the GIMP and so forth installed in there. We've got Firefox by default. Transmission Bittorrent Client. There's like heavy weight on GNOME type applications on the desktop here. That's a choice that Solus has decided to make, and they've decided to mimic the Windowsy look to make that happen. Let's go back and see if we can get our friend Deepin to come back here. There we go. Deepin has come back to life. And this is, somewhere else in between. There's some controversy about Deepin. Somebody suggested that, they even made an official statement. Linux Deepin is not spyware. The logic is that Deepin has cnzz.com links in its website and app store, and ZZ will collect some client information. So this is the controversy rather that surrounds that. But I wouldn't hesitate to give it a try, because I did actually, I loaded it, I ran it for a little while. Like I said, I think it's a beautiful looking desktop. I think that Elementary is a beautiful looking desktop. Not my thing in terms of, application launchers or even application choices, but if you want something that a heck of a lot of people are running, I'd say, you go with Mint or you go with Ubuntu. You're going to have a lot of support from the community with either of those. Manjaro, honestly, I don't care if it's number 2 up there. This is part of why I made the joke about lying with statistics. Obviously, a lot of people are visiting the Manjaro page, whether they're Manjaro fans that want to increase the popularity of their particular distribution. It is definitely not the second most popular distribution that's out there. And if you go over here and you take a look at the user agents, if we remove absolutely everything here and I say only Linux, and I try to break that down based on distributions, let's add Ubuntu in there. All the distributions together, I wish they had put Mint, but Mint would show up like an Ubuntu because it's an Ubuntu-based distribution. So all the distributions, let's add Red Hat in there. Not really much of a blip. SUSE, not much of a blip. Most of the rest of that Linux is going to be over here in Android. Android is what's really bumping up all those Linux numbers, because of course it is a Linux distribution. Anyway, that is what I wanted to show you today. I wanted to show you how people try to decide what a popular Linux distribution is, and how you can try to get through that quagmire or that wall of what is really, really popular. This is not the answer. This is not the answer, but it's a good place to find things out about various Linux distributions. Invariably, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to the site for the individual distributions and, download an ISO and run something. If you want, you can run it in a virtual machine like I'm doing here, and then that way you don't have to actually burn a PC, as in, erase a PC to try something out. This is a great way to do it. If you're already running Linux, you're going to have tools like this that are available on Linux, and you can try different distributions. I'm notorious for changing my Linux distributions on a regular basis. You can see I'm running Fedora at the moment, but I've only been running Fedora for like about a month and a half, and chances are if you're in here a month and a half later, I'll be running something else again. So I'm not sure that I'm the best person in the world in terms of saying, if you want to run what I run, you're going to be running something different about 4 times out of the year. But your distro of choice for web development. If you're talking about on the server backend, it's probably 50-50 between CentOS and Ubuntu. I run both CentOS and Ubuntu servers for web server development or web services development almost equally. Korea. It's really both. It's really both. I often go with CentOS for people who, some of my customers, some of the people that I work with have like the idea of Red Hat, but they don't like the idea of buying a Red Hat license because honestly, they're trying to save money. So they don't want to buy the support contract from Red Hat, but they like the idea of following the Red Hat distribution. So they use CentOS for that reason, because I've explained to them that it's basically the same thing and it basically follows the same trajectory, and frankly it's supported by Red Hat as well. So that, for a lot of people, that's the one I use. If I want things that are a little bit more up to date, in other words, I want to follow more up to date products on the back end, I will typically use Ubuntu. So it's really those two. I don't actually use an awful lot of different things on the development backend, the web dev backend. I hope that answers the question. Another preference question. All right, and honestly, this is actually roughly where I want to leave it for today. If you want my advice in terms of what you really should be running on the front end, if you want a desktop to run, I'll tell you what I've said for years now. Run what your friends are running. Like, use what they're using. If you use what they're using, you're going to have somebody that you can contact, that you can talk to when you run into problems, or when you're trying to figure out, when you're trying to figure out how to install Steam. Is Steam installed in here? No Steam. There we go. Although I think Deepin had Steam. I don't remember whether Deepin had Steam, but I think it did. So if you want to run some other application like that and you need to know how, that's where you're going to do it. That is what you're going to do. Every time I try to go back to Deepin, it has gone back to sleep. That's because I'm not spending any time with it. I apologize for that. Anyway, if you like what I'm doing here, leave some comments in the video when it shows up later live today, or if you're watching it after the fact, leave some comments. If you'd like me to cover something specifically, like if you'd like me to play with some particular piece of software, here, I'll even bring myself back up here. If you'd like me to play with a particular piece of software, if there's something that you'd like me to check out, if there's something that you'd like me to promote, quite frankly, if you have a product or if you're a project that you think is really cool that you'd like to give some exposure to, Linux Journal is graciously, giving me some space and putting these videos on their website so that they can, more people can have access to them, more people can view them, and they would be happy to have your suggestions, and I would be happy to have your suggestions. And speaking of Linux Journal, I want to thank them again for helping to make this possible, and subscribe to them. Let me go to linuxjournal.com in case you don't know where that is. linuxjournal.com. Support them. Become a patron on Patreon or buy a subscription to the magazine. They are a force for Linux and open source software and Linux and open source software knowledge on the internet, and have been since 1991. Have they been around since 1991? I think they've been around since practically the beginning. And of course, Linux has a great appearance on August 25th, 1991, that email from Linus Torvalds. So it wasn't long after that the first Linux Journal showed up. I'm probably wrong about that, and somebody will beat me up on it. But please, by all means, let us know, and I'm sure we'll make it happen for you next time. And if you would like to see some of the earlier stuff that I've done, including stuff that is not without a net, you can go over to my YouTube page, which is at youtube.com/user/freethinkeratlarge. Actually, you don't need the /user. You can just go /freethinkeratlarge, and you'll see a bright red subscribe button. Hit the subscribe button, and you'll be able to see not only my Linux videos, but my gaming videos and all sorts of other things like that. So that's where I'm going to leave it for today. I'm going to I'm sure that I've still got the camera running up here, but à votre santé, bon appétit, and I'll see you next time on Cooking with Linux Without a Net. And thanks for being here with me. Cheers. Goodbye.